right, welcome to the Supporting You in the Skies panel, and here we're going to get perspectives from aviation trade associations. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and we are missing Alpa because the individual with the hurricane wasn't able to get here, Carrie Braun, but I'm going to go ahead and let our panelists introduce themselves.
Okay, good morning. I'll start out. Kyle Lewis with Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association. I work in our government affairs office. State legislative advocacy is my priority, but again, with government affairs, we kind of deal with a very broad cross-section of regulatory and legislative policy. So I'm here representing the Great Lakes region, and I'll pass it on to Tom.
Thank you very much. Tom Charpentier, the Experimental Aircraft Association over in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. And my title over there is Government Relations Director, and it's kind of a wide range of things, but heading up our medical advocacy and medical services program is part of it. So we're very happy to be here.
Good morning. I'm Mark Larsen, Director of Safety and Flight Operations with the National Business Aviation Association. With that, I work with our Volunteer Safety Committee, and that's really our focal for all fitness for duty related issues. Happy to be with you all today and offer our updates here as well.
Hi, my name is Brian Bomhoff. I'm the founder and executive director of the Pilot Mental Health Campaign. We're the first nationwide nonprofit advocacy organization dedicated to pushing policies forward to help address this issue and make things better for aviators who are dealing with mental health conditions. We're much smaller than my three colleagues' organizations up here, but growing fast.
Is it off? Okay.
Here you go.
All right, let's go ahead and get started. What we're going to start with is where we're at right now and what's being done out in the industry. And then from there, we'll go ahead and drill down a little more and look at the changes that are being made, what's been effective, what's not, and what maybe additional changes we could make. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start here with Kyle, with you. And that's what you get when you sit close to the moderator. But what existing support systems or efforts is AOPA pursuing regarding mental health and well-being within the aviation industry?
Have to wait for the microphone to kick on, so a little bit of a delay. So I'll speak to what AOPA has been doing in the past. I think we were part of the 2015 ARC committee. We were also on the 2023 ARC committee. Jim Kuhn, our senior VP of Government Affairs, actually sat on that, provided a great deal of input from our perspective. But as an organization, we're doing constant outreach through our media channels on pilot mental health, also through social media, just like what the FAA said, taking that step forward and bringing this into the spotlight as a day-to-day talking point for pilots. Also, as a member benefit to AOPA, we have the Pilot Information Center in Frederick, Maryland. And as part of that, we have a specific medical group that are tied in with FAA. They can do case updates, things like that with the FAA, find out what the status is. But you can call and ask questions, specific questions before you see your AME. What's required? What are the steps? Get that basic knowledge before you go for your medical exam and find out what that process is and any specific issues you might be dealing with and how to approach that. And we'll say this, Gary Crump, who kind of runs that medical division over in Frederick, start early, right? Get into that treatment early. Don't wait until you go get your medical to start that treatment. If there's something you need to do, start early and get that diagnosis. And again, be cognizant of what may happen down the line. We were talking about special issuances, and the gentleman brought up the question of the time frames. But start early is the key to that, and get in the process. And I'll go on to Tom now.
Thanks a lot, Kyle. And so we are also a pilot advocacy organization as well as a lot of other things. Actually, I should probably start there. So when you hear Experimental Aircraft Association, a lot of things come to mind. But in general, I describe what we do as supporting anybody who flies little airplanes for fun. So we were certainly founded by folks who built and flew their own airplanes, and we still do that today. I actually came here in a kit-built aircraft myself, the RV-6 sitting on the ramp, but we do a lot more than that today. Just a quick show of hands, two things. First off, who here got their start with the Young Eagles program at the AA? You? Good? Okay. So we have, that's a program that has flown, I think at this point, 3 million young people. Basically, anybody under the age of 18 and over the age of, I believe, 6. We can get a free airplane ride with an EAA member, and that's for a lot of people their first exposure to general aviation and aviation in general. So that's been a great program and a lot of exposure to young people, which is of course a really important thing for this topic. And then a quick show of hands, who's been to AirVenture? Okay, a lot more of you. Good, good. So of course we do run essentially the world's biggest aviation convention in Oshkosh, Wisconsin every year. So that's a little bit of what we do as an organization. Now, as far as the medical services, ours is a little unique. If you've been to AirVenture, you know that it is a almost entirely volunteer-run event. I mean, the way I like to see it is that the volunteers and the members, it's really their event. We're just here to support them, the small number of paid staff that we have. Our medical services are also volunteer. We have a number of volunteer AMEs who volunteer their time with the AA members to talk about their cases, kind of point them in the right direction. We don't have quite the amount of kind of tracking a case through the process as some other organizations have, but we do. I think we do a pretty good job at the front end, helping people, giving them guidance and stuff like that. So I administer that program. I'm oftentimes the first one you talk to if you call the AA. I know, known to several of you here in Western Michigan, Dr. Greg Pinnell here in Michigan is also one of our volunteer AMEs, and actually is the one who wrote me into this. So I'm very glad to be here, and that's a little bit about what we do.
So let me take a second and just clarify. So NBA is an organization in Washington, D.C. that represents any individual or company that uses an aircraft in furtherance of their business. Certainly that's going to be small and mid-sized companies all the way up to your largest international corporations, charter, air ambulance, all of that in Part 135 as well. And so in representing that, we acknowledge that there's a lot of diversity in the size of operations. You can have owner flown. Maybe it's individuals that are running a company and they happen to use an aircraft in furtherance of their business, just like a company car, to get to their meetings or bring their clients in, that kind of thing too. So all the way up to companies that have dozens of pilots or even thousands if you're talking a large charter management or fractional company as well too. The needs of humans, I think, are all the same, but acknowledging where the organizational factors are around them that can support them is vastly different in business aviation. This is where our safety committees really kind of come in to try and address fitness for duty broadly, and we see this from all of your aeromedical issues to fatigue and that reality when you're talking about aircraft that are capable of 12 and 14-hour missions halfway around the globe. To certainly mental health, and this was an issue that after kind of the 2015 arc, we really started stepping into that space a little more, and really working to educate the business aviation community on the realities of mental health and making it more of an everyday conversation, and the need for folks to take care of themselves in that way, or to reach out for help when that's appropriate as well too. So we've certainly done a lot in that space from an educational standpoint, to have conversations at our events, to write about it in our magazine, and certainly I've taken a lot of calls from our members as well too, much like my colleagues here from AOPA and EA have as well. And certainly with the pandemic, the calls increased, and we said this is all the more of a space we need to be working on. And so as the opportunity came up to participate on the mental health arc recently as well too, it was my pleasure to serve in that. So really an ongoing effort for NBA and supporting business aviation in this space, and happy to be part of the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you. As our name would suggest, the Pilot Mental Health Campaign is a single issue organization, so we vary somewhat from these other organizations in that instead of representing a specific group of pilots who are operating under a specific set of rules or a specific airline or something like that, our goal is to represent all pilots who happen to be experiencing some sort of, or maybe not even experiencing personally, but know someone or is interested in improving the situation around mental health especially access to mental health care, being an aviator, being in the aviation community, and being in the aviation industry. And so some things that we look to improve upon with the current system is cost, which we hear about a lot. And those costs can be endured by either time off work, or the neurocog testing, or the variety of psychological testing that is required. And to the FAA's great credit, less now to renew your SI. So progress is being made there. We work on decreasing the time that it takes to process a special issuance. And then supporting a lot of the work that kind of Dr. Danzig went through in kind of figuring out which one of these positions, these symptomologies, actually have to be deferred to Washington, D.C., to HQ, and which ones can your ordinary AME clear you on. We're a big fan of the CACIs, the conditions AMEs can issue, that the FAA has rolled out in the last few months. So big fan of that. And then transparency. We're looking to increase access to information within the system. We understand that a lot of people are sometimes put in a bit of a black box with where their application is. And we're working on systems improvements, specifically advocating for more advanced technologies. And in this case, it would probably mean, yes, funding for the FAA to actually implement more advanced technologies like database management systems and a whole bunch of other stuff like that. In terms of the ARC itself, we did not participate directly, but we are broadly supportive of all 24 recommendations. And hats off to everyone on the ARC who put in all the work on that committee, because it's a hefty document, and I recommend all of you read it if you haven't. There's a lot of, I think it's an excellent blueprint of where we need to go and where the FAA has already started going. And so we exist to kind of to help push that forward is what I would say.
All right, thank you. So now I'd like to go ahead and transition to what the FAA was mentioning in the previous presentation about the changes that have happened, the decision tools, and the addition of medications, things like that. So what is it that, based upon your members that you represent for your groups, what is most helpful, and what, we'll just stick with that, or what maybe there are some things that have changed that you don't think is really going to provide much assistance to pilots, but which changes do you think are the most important as far as moving this issue forward within the industry for pilots?
I think the key takeaway, and I'm speaking in terms of general aviation and private pilots, maybe those not actually flying for food, so to speak, is there's more pathways to a yes with what the FAA has come out with in terms of the ARC. And obviously I won't take up too much time so the rest of the panel members can input, but I think what we can all be doing better, especially in the private pilot, general aviation community, is talking about mental health more. The stigma is there, we don't talk about it, right? That's what the gentleman brought up earlier. Because fear of losing your medical, right, permanently losing it, or just the process to get it back, which can be overly extensive and expensive in certain aspects. So I think we need to do a better job explaining that process, that it's not always a no, and I'm very glad that the FAA kind of dispelled some of those myths, but even from an organizational standpoint, obviously more media, more communications, more in-person discussions on this very topic for that direct Q&A and get input from our members, I think is very important. But the key takeaway, I think, for our members would be more pathways to that yes, and more access to that.
Thanks. Yeah, I think the changes that have come through in the last, certainly since the ARC, but even going back a little bit further than that, so let's say like the last, say 2 years that I've been involved with this topic, have been very positive, universally positive. And I do applaud the leadership of aerospace medicine right now for getting as much done as is possible at the current moment. So, even if we can't come up with a perfect solution that fixes everything that we would like to see done, just getting what we can do right now with the data that we have, with the being able to make decisions that aerospace medicine is confident with, is super helpful. So I think it really is kind of an exemplar of don't let perfect be the enemy of good. We've had a lot of good in the last couple of years, and especially in the last couple of months. Like the new disposition table on depression, where you can potentially sometimes walk out of an AME's office with a medical certificate, even with a history of, sometimes even with active psychotherapy going on. I mean, that is a huge breakthrough, and something that I think is a massive positive step. So. Again, I don't think I could pick a favorite, but I think the work is very good in terms of where we need to go from here. I think just kind of generally conceptually, the way I like to talk about it is there is a level at which for any, let's just limit it to medical issues. For any medical issue, be it something that might have implications for flying or not, there's kind of a level of hassle that you're willing to accept before you actually get that treated, right? You have a headache, it might go away on its own, right? So you're not necessarily willing to go through the hassle of driving down to the clinic and seeing if it's a major issue. Now, if you've taken Tylenol for 3 days and it's not going away, yeah, you better go to the doctor, right? So there's kind of a level of concern and pain that you go through before you hit that threshold where you're willing to seek treatment. What's very important in aerospace medicine, I think, is that level is kind of variable, right? In terms of either the real or perceived hassle that you have to go through to get treated, and B, get your medical certificate, right? So the more we can do to drive that threshold down so that it's not way up here and you endure all of this, potentially pain and discomfort and really bad things before you get to that point where now no matter what the consequences are, I've got to go get treatment. If we can get that down for everybody, I think that's really important. And like I said, that's real and perceived. So part of that too is on us to, as Dr. Giovannetti said, bust myths and make sure that people understand that, it's not quite as daunting as a lot of folks make it out to be in the industry. On the other hand, I think we talked about, two different things in the last presentation. We had talked a lot about delays and cost, and I'd just like to add to that uncertainty too. It doesn't have to be much uncertainty. I mean, I think, if somebody came to me with, pick your diagnosis, I would very much encourage them to pursue their medical certificate if this is something they want to do. But, it's always in the back of your head, what are the odds here? And, if it was 100% certain, well, there wouldn't be a review process, would there? So I think one really positive thing about the changes that we've seen, bringing it back to that, is the disposition tables and the additional certainty that it brings to the process. It's very clearly laid out, if X, then Y. And I think that's really important.
I certainly agree with the comments shared here, and I want to kind of be more additive to that as well. I very much support the nature of addressing stigma and acknowledging that every one of our business aviation organizations, they have their own company cultures and that reality as well too. Some of that's part of what we're trying to work through. Sharing of the best practices and acknowledging that sometimes maybe it is we need folks that need a little time away from the safety sensitive functions that they have, whether that's flying or maintaining the aircraft as well too. And so there's some organizations that have found some best practices for doing that without having to really get into the what of what's going on. Maybe that's a challenge at home with their kids or their spouse. But having a way to say, I'm not at 100% today, whatever that situation is, has been one of the best practices we've been able to help share. And acknowledge you have that, well before you get to, certainly, yes, the realities of the uncertainties, the timelines, and the financial investment that comes with, let's say, more advanced care, and then ultimately FAA certification with that as well. So, certainly see that as a key piece of moving all this forward. From our perspective, we are very much working to try and further offer support for the community. As we talked about with the first panel, the airline community does have peer support programs and really have advanced that. In the business aviation segment, like I said, we've got operations that have 1 or 2 pilots in a single aircraft, all the way up to hundreds. And so that's, to have something completely in-house like a given airline may have is probably not really practical in most of our operations. And so we're trying to work together to see, are there ways we can aggregate resources to help offer that? Yes, there's going to be some differences than how you might see it rolled out in a large 121 air carrier environment to accommodate that. But where the commonalities of things that we can leverage, the resources and the approaches and best practices to help folks out is part of what we're working through with that and trying to bring those same resources to the business aviation community as well.
Awesome, well said. I think I would echo all the points made about the improved disposition tables, the additional khakis, the fast track options. I do know aviators in our group who have benefited directly from these changes in just the last few months. So it's not as if it's just kind of a little chipping around the edge. They are, as Tom said, some pretty significant changes that have been made in the last 6 to 12 months across the whole system. So these are having effects. I do think there's an education gap, but I do also want to slightly push back against the notion that maybe this is all in pilots' heads, because when it comes to the time and the delays and the money, all it takes is one peer, one colleague that person knows, and they see the best case scenario is, and I understand this might well shorten in the short term, hopefully, but as of right now, at least 6 months to stabilize on one SSRI. That might not be the treatment that your treating physician prefers to use or that you tolerate best. And it's still sort of a one-size-fits-all approach. It's getting better, slowly getting better. But the complaints that we still hear are from the people who they're like, I fit all these boxes. It's like check, 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 check. And it's like, and then half of this one, I basically check, but you don't quite fit through the matrix yet. And so I think moving to a system that's SMS-based and focused on symptoms rather than diagnoses, I think would go a long ways towards that, and I think we're moving in that direction. And then, of course, just staffing and resources, I would say, needs to be addressed at the organizational level within the FAA, and that's a more difficult topic for legislators to wrap their heads around, and for a lot of us to wrap our heads around. But I do want to acknowledge that we understand that the FAA is resource constrained and that they're doing the best they can right now, and we need to make sure that they have the resources to do that.
If I can pick up on that maybe again a little bit too, I certainly agree. The timeline, oftentimes the call that I get isn't always from the person that's needing the treatment. It's from the chief pilot or director of operations, really trying to understand, okay, how long is this person going to be out, and what is this going to cost? And so that's I think some of that certainty would go a long way. That I just want to reiterate the whether it's a timeline or exactly what's going to be involved goes a long way in helping get that support. Let's say from the principal of the company to say, yep, we acknowledge this person needs some time away. How can we continue to make sure they've got the resources that they need and get better and then ultimately return to flying duties as well after that. So
Just one quick.
Sure. Yeah.
One quick thing that I understand might be under consideration and that was implemented in 2010 after the first SSRI protocol was some sort of amnesty or non-enforcement period. I do think that would be very useful again, because I think there are a lot of people who would fit into the new options, but unfortunately they've maybe not been totally truthful in the past on their records. So some sort of deferred, no punishment. Yeah.
Great, I'm glad you made those comments, because that actually leads us into my next question is, we've all come up with issues that need to be addressed, such as reducing the stigma and everything that's involved with the special issuance process, such as misinformation. You'll never, we're addressing if you are diagnosed with depression, you'll never get your medical back. The uncertainty, because you can say 96% return to flying. Wonder if you're that 4% that does not, or the cost, or not just those that I listed, but there's many more. So we know what's wrong, but propose solutions to some of those, whatever issues you may find, which may not be that I listed, but that you find is important, and what would you do to fix them?
I don't want to get too far ahead in questioning, but also for time, maybe we can chat about this now, is going back to the non-punitive, reporting, because that leads into another section of data collection, right? So if there are pilots not reporting certain issues in certain classes of medicals, that is data that is missing. So a non-punitive progression through the medical process that we just hit on a little bit may provide some more insights and details on that missing 4% or even a larger cross-section of pilots. So I think that's very important, and I'll pass it on to Tom.
Thanks a lot.
Making notes.
Yeah. It's a big question. I was trying to.
Yeah, you can just drill down to what you think is important. I listed a lot.
Sure. So yeah, I think there are a number of, so certainly the concerns about the evaluation protocols are real, and I think again the FAA has put forth so far a very good faith effort to address those, but certainly we have more work to do. I think we would benefit, and I think the ARC report does speak to this as well, kind of a more holistic approach to the safety picture. And what I mean by that is going back to what I said about the kind of the hassle threshold, if you will. Mental health is a little different in terms of it may not always be obvious, even to a clinician, unless the individual comes forward with the very real issues that they're dealing with. So if people feel, I'll put it this way, disincentivized to either treat, which is I believe is the worst case scenario, or come forward, which I think is the second worst case scenario, that's detrimental to aviation safety. Period. Potentially more. So I think that we need to kind of calibrate the evaluation protocols to make sure that yes, I mean, there are people who at least temporarily are not fit for one reason or another to be pilot in command of an aircraft. I don't think any of us dispute that. But if we can, kind of figure out, and one of the things we talked about in the ARC was what kind of information do we need? What kind of, is there treatment that can go on that might not necessarily even we need to report, because maybe the safety benefit of somebody actually getting treated is more than the safety benefit of actually evaluating the case. There is a lot tied up with that. There's a lot of risk management, a lot of very difficult risk management to work through with a question like that. But that was a question that we posed on the ARC. So I think we need to drill into that quite a bit more. And I think and on the association side, I think we also need to contribute to making sure people do have accurate information, and and encouraging them to no matter what the current state of the current regulatory environment is, to seek treatment, because ultimately I think that's best for everyone.
I certainly agree with that take, and I've talked a little bit about some of the solutions, things that we're working on as well too. The ARC report talks further about kind of some of the financial safety nets and things. That's a piece we're, I think, further exploring, trying to make sure we've definitely got the kind of peer support side of it taken care of at the outset, and then to the extent that we can help folks make sure that they've got a full understanding of what the certification process looks like, and that they've got the resources they need, or the test results, whatever it is, as part of a complete package to reduce the timelines for just things bouncing back because it's an incomplete package, has been part of what we've been trying to work through, maybe in the nearer term. And again, just continuing to keep folks up to date on what the latest updates are, so that they are with that. I think that's kind of the big stuff for right now.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that, and also what Tom said about the risk equation, because I understand that it is a very delicate and complicated task to try to look through someone's psychological case history and figure out if they're the needle in the haystack, yes or no, and then apply a percentage likelihood to something like that. That's not easy, but I agree that I think what you could be missing in that equation is the risk of, the 56% of pilots who have admitted not receiving healthcare or avoiding healthcare in some form. How many of those actually have something that could be serious? And even if it is 1 or 2%, being conservative, how do we not factor this into the holistic risk equation? And so I think that's part of bringing it more in line with SMS principles, which it sounds like we're on our way to doing, which is great. And then I would also say giving people more agency to feel like they have more control over the situation. And that could mean that maybe their own doctor, for certain cases, certain classes of medical, certain situations, maybe their own doctors have quite a bit more say than, say, the doctors at Oklahoma City for some cases. And then keeping it with SMS principles, I think, the safety, the continuum of safety. And so do we need the exact same set of rules for first, second, and third class? Or might it be possible to maybe start easing up on some of the things in third class and using that as a test case for potentially second class, you could argue has been done with basic med. So experimentation here and there. And then also we need to verify the data that we do have and try to make sure that it's recreatable, that 56%, and then do the data collection to figure out how we kind of get to the point where people are feeling less stigmatized, and especially like scientifically, how do you justify certain compounds, certain treatments, certain modalities, and not others? I think quantifying that for the FDA is not an easy task, and trying to do that entirely separately for the FAA is even more monumental a task. So there must be a simpler way.
And actually, Brian, just to riff on that point for a second, I'm glad you brought up basic med. I was wondering when we were going to get to that. So in our world, we have not only basic med, we have sport pilot too. And at least for basic med, we have so far not seen any statistically significant link between that lower level of certification and increased risk as compared to other third-class certificate holders. I believe I'm characterizing that study correctly. But Kyle, since your organization actually puts on the basic med course, do we want to speak to that a little bit about how we manage risk ourselves in our community?
Yeah, so for those not familiar, with third-class medicals and kind of the basic flying, right? Pilots self-certify before they go fly, right? There are some conditions, obviously other medical conditions that you're not going to go fly with, right? Tom talked about having a headache or the severity of a certain issue, even a head cold. You're self-certifying yourself as a pilot to do that, but mental health, a little bit more ambiguous on what that threshold is. And Tom talked about that earlier, but basic med, to hit on that again, if you're not familiar, basic med is a separate classification of medical. It's not part of the first, second, or third. In fact, it was legislated going on 6 years ago, an actual legislative process for basic med, and it's between your doctor, your personal doctor. No records are being sent to FAA. And it's an online course through AOPA, and I think there's a couple other courses out there now through the Mayo Clinic and maybe the Cleveland Clinic, basic med courses. But and again, it's that conversation that we just chatted about is self-certifying, and what is that threshold? So I think it's important for general aviation pilots, and that even falls into some other categories where they are flying for work. Under Part 91 rules, is that self-certification. Maybe there's not a flight department support system there, so it goes into the peer groups and how those can be incorporated, from the airlines and corporate into GA, and how to deal with these mental health issues on a daily basis. Because when we're walking out to an airplane to go fly, there is not a doctor standing there, certifying you every time you go fly. So it's on the pilot. As a student pilots here at WMU and other universities, what does that day-to-day look like for you? And how do you self-certify, I think, is a big question we need to answer in this topic.
All right. Very. All right. Well, what I wanted to do, I think we have until 1/4 after. Is that correct? All right, I do have other questions, but I really want to make this more interactive, and I know you probably have a lot of questions right now. So I thought that it would be a good idea for the next about 7 minutes we have, rather than me continuing to ask questions and things, really address what's on your mind. So with that, I'll go ahead and open it up for questions.
So there's a lot of talk about the medical diagnoses and taking yourself off the flight line, getting medicals, all that stuff. I know there's been some progress on just sort of pilot upkeep and things like therapy and things like that. What kinds of expansions is there or solutions is there for pilots who are on the flight line to seek help without having to take themselves out of the equation, so that you can sort of just have that medical upkeep if you're going through a tough time or whatever it might be, trying to find someone to talk to without having to say, well, I'm just going to not go to work anymore.
Could you just quickly summarize the question before you answer it, in case no one else heard it?
It's more of a kind of peer support question, or kind of heading that direction.
Yeah, so there's, in the 121 environment, like I said, they've leveraged peer support extensively, where that is not something that would necessarily dictate removing yourself from the flight line. In business aviation, and my understanding again too would that therapy wouldn't necessarily be grounding, right? I mean, you can go seek whether that's calling your company's EAP, talking to other mental health professionals. That is in and of itself not necessarily grounding. And FAA folks in the back row, if you're give me a sign if I'm wrong on that one. So those are options, right? Now they are. If you go apply for your next medical, then that's part of that. For example, if you see a mental health professional, then that's just a disclosure on the medical certificate, the application form, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's grounding. Is that sounds about right? Okay, thanks for the heads up. So those are options. Now, I think there's folks that are maybe more or less familiar as far as mental health professionals go with the way the policies work and the kind of the realities of diagnoses and other things. So there are some that it may behoove, let's say, pilots to go see the folks that are going to be familiar with, what are the kinds of things they would want to include in the letter that the FAA is ultimately going to want to see, perhaps. And so where we know about some of those folks, that's where sometimes, if that's necessary, we try and connect folks to them and help make sure that they've got access to those professionals, and whatever that level of care is, as may be necessary. So,
I think the expansion on that would be, is there a point where just seeking general help is no longer a disclosable thing? Is there a point where we won't have to tell the FAA, hey, I was sad one day? Or
Depends what the definition of sad is.
right. I think that disincentivizes people to seek help because, okay, well, I'm going to have to disclose that on my medical, even if it doesn't necessarily mean it's a forbiddable offense.
Yeah, I do think you have more options than a lot of people think right now. I mean, like Mark said, peer support is a great option. We're a big fan of that. At the same time, I know people who have attributed their lives being saved to peer support. And also, I know people who wouldn't use it and prefer to use a licensed counselor for whatever reason. And so I think you need to have both options. But a lot of peer support programs do a good job of providing an off-ramp to other options as well.
I believe we might have had a clarification on that.
Yeah, Dr.
and I would say we did make the recommendation as the ARC to the FAA to reconsider that as a required disclosure on the form. So
Dr. Oslander, did you want to address that specific issue?
I'm going to be Carrie Braun's stunt double today. My name is Dr. Jessica Auslander. I'm also a contractor mental health professional for ALPA I. Carrie couldn't make it today, but to kind of answer your question, so ALPA has the Are You in the Green campaign, where they conceptualize the mental health continuum from green, yellow, orange to red, from having a normal reaction to having symptoms to being, quote, injured. As a mental health professional, I can tell you just because you catch a feeling doesn't mean you can't fly a plane. So what Dr. Danzig was talking about earlier with the chart, like how we kind of codify diagnoses, that what we would call an adjustment disorder. Congratulations, you're normal. right? That's, yeah, my husband, who's a pilot, teases me I'm the only one who can say that to a pilot and get away with it. It means you're having a normal experience. It doesn't mean you have to be grounded. Going to counseling, going to therapy doesn't mean you have to be grounded. That's their point with moving it to the SMS lens versus the diagnosis yes or no lens, is that you can be seeing a therapist. What's more important is what's going on. Are you having symptoms that would interfere with safety-related duties? So if you look at, they didn't show it today, but if you look in the AME guide, there's a disposition, it's a 9-question checklist for the AME. That last question asks if any of the treating, the counselor, the mental health professional, the AME, whoever, has any safety-related concerns. So they have allowed this space where you can be a human being and it's not going to impact your ability to fly if it's not a safety-related symptom. That kind of clarify.
I think so. I think it's just the nature of having to disclose it on your medical in the first place.
Yeah, and with the new guidance, with how they have outlined that, where they showed like kind of the V and Z codes, it's the same outcome. So I've seen this in my private practice and all the peer support group that I work with, is that the AMEs, yes, you have to disclose all therapy visits, right? But they've given the AMEs so much more detail and what's deferrable and what's not. The outcome is the same. So EAP was not reportable, right? Because EAP is supposed to handle those V and Z codes. Well, now it's reportable, but those V and Z codes are still not deferrable. So it's the same outcome. It's not affecting. No one's getting grounded because you're having relationship issues. No one's getting grounded because you're grieving. So the outcome is the same. It just looks a little bit different.
We might have time for just one more quick question. I think we have a.
You can push a little longer.
Okay. Think somebody in the back or something.
Throw it out
Okay.
there again, why not? Yeah, I think that's part of maybe the myth that's going on there, because we all know you check stuff in box 18, and it's who knows the time frame. And we'll stick with mental health right now, but I do a lot. I'm out of high school teaching kids, and this is their first time going through the medical process. It's ADD, ADHD, anxiety, depression, and concussions are the big 5 that I see denials for. And if they are seeing somebody for, again, a family issue, but it's not that big a deal, and they check yes, well, here we go. And maybe that's what we don't know. I think there's that, we don't know the process. So you check this box, stand by. It's coming, you don't know what, and that's the big part of the reason why. You don't know, hey, you're gonna have to do this, and you're gonna have to do this. And I know you can say, hey, the AME will be involved, but I don't know if there are AMEs in here, but that doesn't always work out that way. There's like, oh, you got to go get this paperwork from this doctor. I don't know, because then the kids come to me going, I don't know, I'm a pilot. I'm not a lawyer and a doctor. I slept on a Holiday Inn kind of thing. But I just know from experience that you're going to, ADD, ADHD, 90 days off the meds. You have to get the cognitive evaluation, all these neuropsych things, and stand by for 10-month wait.
All right. Well.
So, when they check that box because they have anxiety or depression or they're taking a medication, the AOPA database. No, or it's conditional.
Very good.
It's just so, for years, but still don't understand the process of where it goes. And if you can't find somebody.
All right, we have somebody over here to address that for you.
So I'm in AME about an hour north of Detroit. I would like to also stress Kyle's point of calling your AME. But don't just call your AME, sit down and schedule an appointment. I offer for my pilots a confidential consultation, right?
Well, that's what I told you.
Because aviation is a foreign language, medicine is a foreign language, and I'm melding the two. So you can get an individualized plan of what needs to happen and what information you need to get me, and ultimately the FAA, right? So I do this all the time. I just had a couple of them yesterday. We sit down in a room, it's me and a notebook and a piece of paper, and we go through and I pull up the AME guide, right? And we go through each condition. So if you have ADHD, we kind of go through the checklist and I say, hey, you're fast track because of this. Hey, you're standard track because of that, right? So you actually have, when you leave my office, an individualized plan with a checklist of stuff that you need to get me, right? So for example, if we know the condition is deferring, right? So if you're on ADHD medication and you're on it currently, we know that's a standard track pathway. It's not a fast track. You know exactly what you need to get to me. So we know, right, we have to manage expectations of this is what you're going into, this is the information that you need to know. So when you come and see me, right, to do your exam, you already have all this information. So I can either send it in or upload it to AMCS, which is the FAA website. So all that information is already there. So you're not waiting 2 or 3 or 4 or 6 months to get the initial letter that says, well, we need this, 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 and this. I can already tell you a majority of what's going to be needed. Every now and then we get a letter that says, hey, we need more information. You already submitted this. But I would highly, highly recommend for people who are first-time people or have had a change in their medical condition, schedule an appointment with an AME. I schedule all my appointments for an hour. You can sit down, you know exactly what's going on, and we can manage expectations, understand what I need, what my requirements are, and understand what your requirements are from the FAA. And you want someone who's got a good bedside manner, who doesn't care like what your history is. I'm an ER doc, right? As my day job. You're not gonna shock me, right? of things that have been done before, right? I deal with mental health all the time in the emergency department. It's a crisis. It's not just in the aviation community, it's everywhere, right? So I think all of these things, we just need to understand what the requirements are, melding the two, having more transparency, like Brian was saying, and making sure we're all on the same page going forward.
Would an AME's experience, like say mental health issues or some other medical things affect that? I've seen.
Well, I think there's differing levels, right? I mean, you've got good doctors and you've got crappy doctors. Right. You've got, I don't know how, am I the only AME here?
So that's what I mean, do I talk to my AME and go, what
well,
mental health do you have? I'm gonna go find a different AME. I usually tell them to go find an AOP.
You may have to do that, right? I mean, just like the AMEs have a decent bedside manner, there was a question in the back about, which AMEs, what is happening for updates, right? There are some AMEs who don't attend any of the sessions, and they click through when we get on AMCS and they click through and they don't, whatever. There are those of us who log on each month and say, okay, these are the updates, this is what's going on. We're attending conferences, we're attending national conferences, local conferences, things like that. So you just have to have your level of comfort with whoever you're going to, and if you're not comfortable with them, just like any other doctor, find someone who's gonna listen to you and who's gonna have your back. And be honest with you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for. All right. Unfortunately, I think that we're going to have to end it here because I'm sure everyone is. I think lunch is coming up next. So, with that, I will go ahead and hand it back over.